Hey YouTube. Um, I'm gonna do something a little different today. Uh, as some of you may know, I've been somewhat of a poet my entire life. I've always written poetry, and so I'd like to read you a poem today and see if it kicks off any kind of interest. Hey Bob, welcome to the stream. I really liked that video you did with the putting the anemone in your tank. Um, Saltwater's always been something that kind of pulled me, but I've always stayed away from. But I enjoy living vicariously through others, and your saltwater tank is something of interest to me. All right, the poem that I have chosen to read, and I'm not sure it's going to work perfectly for uh, my usage, but I'm going to try it anyway. And this is a poem by Elizabeth Bishop, and it is called "The Fish." And I've always enjoyed trying to plug poetry into places where it doesn't really belong. Um, I've always loved poetry, and so I'm going to try to plug Elizabeth Bishop's poem "The Fish" into our fish keeping studies and see if we can make some connections here. So this is "The Fish," and I don't remember exactly when she wrote it. I think it was about the middle of her career that she wrote it. She lived from 1911 to 1979, so she's fairly current with with as far as poets go. Okay, "The Fish." I caught a tremendous fish and held him beside the boat, half out of the water, with my hook fast in a corner of his mouth. He didn't fight. He hadn't fought at all. He hung a grunting weight, battered and venerable, and homely. Here and there his brown skin hung in strips, like ancient wallpaper, and its patterns of darker brown was like wallpaper, shapes like full-blown roses, stained and lost through age. He was speckled with barnacles, fine rosettes of lime, and infested with tiny white sea lice, and underneath two or three rags of green weed hung down, while his gills were breathing in the terrible oxygen, the frightening gills, fresh and crisp with blood that can cut so badly. I thought of the coarse white flesh, packed in like feathers, the big bones and the little bones, the dramatic reds and blacks of his shiny entrails, and the pink swim bladder like a big peony. I looked into his eyes, which were far larger than mine, but shallower and yellowed, the irises backed and packed with tarnished tinfoil, seen through the lenses of old scratch isinglass. They shifted a little, but not to return my stare. It was more like the tipping of an object towards light. I admired his sullen face, the mechanism of his jaw, and then I saw that from his lower lip, if you could call it a lip, grim, wet, and weapon-like, hung 5 old pieces of fish line, or 4 and a wire leader, with the swivel still attached, with all their 5 big hooks grown firmly in his mouth. A green line frayed at the end where he broke it, 2 heavier lines and a fine black thread still crimped from the strain and snap when it broke and he got away. like metals with their ribbons, frayed and wavering, a five-haired beard of wisdom trailing from his aching jaw. I stared and stared, and victory filled up the little rented boat. From the pool of bilge where oil had spread like a rainbow around the rusted engine, to the bailer rusted orange, the sun-cracked thwarts, the oarlocks on their strings, the gunwales, until everything was a rainbow, 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 and I let the fish go. And that's Hey Dan Slee, welcome to the stream. And that is a piece of poetry about catching an old battered fish that had gotten away many, many times from other anglers. And yet once she caught it, once she had won the battle, she let the fish go. But it's interesting in its description of the fish, and my experience down through the years of reading fish poetry is that a lot of times fish are presented to us by the perceptions of the authors as mechanical, as robotic, as mechanisms that don't express a whole lot of life. In this instance, the poem expresses that this fish is an old battered veteran with lots of leaders and hooks in his mouth, where he had escaped many times. So it lends itself to the idea of the fish fighting and the fish having life in it. But most of the time in older poetry that you read, fish are kind of presented to us as automatons. They're not presented as animated living creatures. And while I love poetry, I've always found that kind of made me feel like the poet didn't really understand the fish the way most fish keepers understand a fish. Hey Valley Fish, welcome to the stream. And I think that there are a lot of similarities between poetry and fish keeping. There are a lot of ways that we can draw similar kinds of lines of reasoning. Poetry, while on the surface it seems like something that anyone could do, and the truth be told, anyone can do it, just like anyone can be a fish keeper. But to really understand poetry well, to really understand what is required to write a good poem, you need to study. You need to do research on other people's poetry. You need to understand the nuances of poetry, the building blocks that build a poetic line, the construction that is required to make a poem flow. There are a lot of things that you need to understand really well about a poem before you can begin to construct one of your own that has a chance of actually having legs and going somewhere. And it's the same thing in fish keeping. While you can go buy a goldfish and put it in a bowl and feed it and watch it and enjoy it without any real understanding of what's going on, without any real knowledge about how fish keeping, what fish keeping requires to really keep your fish happy or thriving. It's it's work. You literally have to work at being a fish keeper. You have to study. You have to use your powers of perception to observe the creatures in your care closely enough that you know whether they're quote quote happy or whether they are suffering from some malady. It requires a certain amount of effort to stretch your abilities into the place where you have observed, where you have studied, where you have gained knowledge enough that you can use that knowledge in your observation of your fish tanks and your fish themselves. And how do we quantify whether our fish are happy? You know, in poetry, fish are described as unfeeling, unemotional automatons. And yet, when we as fish keepers spend a great deal of time observing our fish, we can actually begin to discern when they are thriving, when they are happy, by their behaviors, by the way, Corey calls it loving life. And that's a great description of how we can tell that our fish are more than just surviving. It's one thing to just keep a fish alive for 2 years, but it's something else entirely to give that fish a chance to thrive and, as Corey calls it, love life. And it takes a certain amount of skill, of past observation, of understanding fish behaviors to know whether our fish are loving life or whether they're just surviving or whether they're suffering from some malady. You have to do a certain amount of research, a certain amount of internalizing the experience of you having observed that fish for a long time, for 6 months or a year, so that you can begin to recognize, hey, that fish is not acting right. I've been watching that fish for a year. I've seen it when it was loving life. I've seen it when it was just doing okay. And I've seen it now when something is wrong. It's starting to, there's a myriad bunch of behaviors that can be recognized as something wrong. The fish isn't swimming properly. The fish is hiding when normally it is out and around all the other fish. The fish is flicking itself off the bottom. The fish is flicking against other objects in the aquarium. The fish is turning upside down occasionally. There are a lot of cues that we can take from observing our fish to recognize that our fish is either happy, loving life, or something's wrong. And that takes a certain amount of skill. It takes a great deal of observation. And by observation, I don't mean walking through the room and watching your fish as they come toward you because they're hungry. I'm talking about, like when you feed your fish. Chris Biggs says, when you feed your fish, sit down and watch them eat. sit down and observe them and spend a certain amount of your energy and effort observing your fish tank, observing what's going on in your fish tank, and observing your fish. I mean, we as fish keepers should be doing, hey Justin Shepard, welcome to the stream. We should be doing this because it's something we love to do. It it shouldn't feel like work to us. If we're keeping fish and it feels like this heavy burden that we're carrying, if it feels like this monotonous job that we have to do over and over and over again, then we're obviously not enjoying our fish keeping. And so my impression of that is that we need to rethink our fish keeping. Maybe we're keeping too many tanks. Maybe we're not keeping fish that we really enjoy. Maybe we've reached a point where we're bored with what we're keeping. There's a lot of reasons why fish keeping might become a burden, but I just want to express to you that you need to get back to what gives you joy in fish keeping. You need to focus in on on the things that make you love fish keeping, the things that make you drawn towards keeping certain fish, the things that will cause you to enjoy your fish keeping, that will cause you to say, I've had a really busy day. I'm really tired from what's gone on today, but I am still going to sit down and relax and enjoy watching my fish eat or just go about their business and observe them and pull some joy out of that situation, pull some pleasure out of the idea that these fish are thriving, that not only are they happy, and not only are they showing breeding behaviors, not only are they living a long life, they are actually thriving. They are happy. And that's a certain amount of skill. You have practiced your observation and your perception. You have studied the creatures in your care deeply enough to understand that to understand the difference between them thriving and them not thriving, and to understand the difference between them loving life or just surviving. And I just want you as fish keepers to reach the point where you recognize what the pleasure of fish keeping is for you, and that drives you to be in the moment of watching your fish, in the moment of observing your fish closely enough to understand them, to learn their behaviors, to recognize when they are happy and not happy. And bringing it back to poetry, there's very little in my experience of reading poetry about fish that talks about fish being happy, showing any kind of real emotion. Now, the poem by Elizabeth Bishop does show a little bit, in the sense that This is a grizzled veteran fish that has survived many battles and is a winner as far as angling. Dan Slee says, agreed, Dwayne. I just replaced fish with shrimp and plants, and it's the same thing. It's uh, when I first got my shrimp from Lucas, I couldn't keep my eyes off of that tank. I was always in there watching them, observing their behaviors, absorbing. They scared me to death. I was afraid to do a water change on that tank because I had never kept shrimp neocaridinias before, and I I spent hours watching that fish tank, shrimp tank, a fish tank with shrimp in it, and I think that that is part of what draws us to fish keeping is the ability to learn, the ability to study, the ability to research. And I think it's incumbent on all of us as fish keepers, once we reach a certain level of fish keeping, that we try to pass that passion on to other people that are just starting out in their fish keeping careers. You know, a lot of people go and buy a fish tank and within 6 months it's in the garage filled with dust and they're never going to keep fish again. And a lot of that is because they don't have the research under their belt. They don't have a working knowledge of fish keeping under their belt. And I think it's incumbent on us as fellow fish keepers to try to pass that on. Dan Slee says, my favorite tanks, whatever type, are the ones where there's always something new to see and things going on. Yeah, I love that about my tanks too. I try to set tanks up in the beginning so that they kind of produce that. But I just think I think that fish keeping is something that requires a certain amount of effort to reach a stage where you begin to be able to recognize things about your fish tank, things about your fish, things about your shrimp, things about your whatever inverts it is that you are keeping, and the same thing for salt tanks, where you have gained enough knowledge and done enough research and seen enough YouTube videos and studied enough fish websites that all of that begins to coalesce into giving you a really strong framework for which to observe the creatures under your care with an eye to whether they are happy and loving life or whether they are just merely staying alive or whether they're in some kind of trouble, you know. And it's very minute things sometimes that will tell you. Dan Slee says mentorship is so important in this hobby, which is why YouTube is so amazing. That, and even when experienced, sharing thoughts and methods with peers is so important. Yeah, I think that is the true value of YouTube in the sense of the fish fan, is that it gives us a platform, and I say us generally here, it provides a platform for people that have experience in fish keeping or even people that are just gaining experience in fish keeping, to share that with others. And I think that that is our fundamental duty as Fish Fam, is to share what knowledge we have gleaned, what worked for us, our anecdotal experience, things that have happened to us that will probably happen to other fish keepers as well if they're around in the hobby long enough, so that we can pass on that knowledge so that people don't feel like they are alone in the fish keeping world, so that they understand that there are people out there trying to help them. That, and even when experienced during sharing, oh, I read that one already. Fish clubs and events too, but those have lots of issues too. YouTube's so accessible and much less elitism and snobbery. Yeah, I'm not going to get into elitism and snobbery, because I'll end up going on a 4-day rant about that. I I just don't feel like there's a place in this hobby for elitism and snobbery, and yet it's there no matter how much we try to look away from it. So yes, you're going to run into the good old boys club, people that were old school, had to do a certain amount of things to rise in the ranks, and then they turned around and the people behind them had to do a certain amount of things to rise in the ranks, and it built up this pyramid where people were trying to climb the pyramid and get to the top, because the few people at the top had all the information, and everybody that was climbing was trying to get to that information. I think that is being broken down, that the idea that only the top echelon gets all the good tidbits and information should be going the way of the dodo. It should be a thing now where there is a lot of information out there for everybody to access. There are any number of people. Yeah, it's. The one thing that I fall back on, Dan Slee, is my teaching in Buddhism, that everybody is our teacher, that a lot of times what we see in others is simply a mirror that we are looking at, that shows us our own faults. So if I find someone ego-driven and a snob, maybe what I'm really seeing is my own ego showing, and I'm as much a snob as they are. So it's helpful to recognize that someone's personality may indeed be teaching us how we should not behave, or teaching us improvements that we need to make in our own personalities. So yes, you go to meetings and you meet people and you think, oh my God, I don't ever want to talk to that person again. But maybe what we're really learning in that situation is, oh my gosh, am I like that? Is that the way I come off to other people? If it is, I need to do something desperately different so that I'm not coming off to other people like that. So everything can be a learning experience. Everything can be a way to get better at what we're doing, just like me talking about poetry being a potential uh, case study for fish keeping, in the sense that while it appears on the from the outside as it is not really that deep, that oh, it's just a bunch of words thrown down on a page, the more you learn about poetry, the more you really begin to study the forms. Hey, Coronakin, welcome to the stream. Coronakin says no one is totally useless. They can always be used as a bad example. Yep, you're right about that. But sometimes that bad example is teaching us. Sometimes that bad example may be there specifically for us to learn. but I feel like if if someone can understand how complex and how intricate poetry is actually, that they begin to understand the construction, they begin to understand the tools, the methodology, the different styles, you can also transcend that into fish keeping, because that's exactly what fish keeping is as well. There's construction in fish keeping, there's research of history in fish keeping, there's studying of different styles, there's studying of different species. There is a great deal of knowledge that is required to be able to functionally use the tools of the trade. If you have no clue about how to use the tools of the trade, and in this case we're talking about writing poetry or keeping fish, if you have no functional ability whatsoever in how to use the tools of the trade, i.e., understanding a nitrogen cycle in fish keeping or understanding what alliteration is in poetry, you can't really use those tools effectively enough to produce a poem, a functional poem, or a functional fish tank. So it requires a certain amount of information, a certain amount of study, a certain amount of research, a certain amount of just actual experience of going out and buying a fish tank and buying some fish that you like how it looks and trying to keep it alive in the tank and failing, and the fish dies, and instead of seeing that fish dying as the end of your experience in fish keeping, you see it as a learning opportunity, and you try to study and find out what you did wrong and how come that fish died and what could you possibly do for the next time when you go buy that fish again, how you would be able to keep it alive, even if it's alive longer, alive until it actually can survive, alive until it's thriving, alive until it's happy and loving life and producing more fish by breeding or having breeding behaviors go on. There's this ladder you can climb as to your ability to keep fish in the fish keeping hobby. And by the same token, there's exactly that ladder to climb in poetry as well, as in being so well read that you can recognize the style that someone is using, hearkening back to other poets, and you could do the same thing in fish keeping by recognizing someone's tank, hearkening back to the teachings of Diane Wallstead, hearkening back to Ad Konings. Hey, Candy. Candy, my wife and I so loved that video. I know Bob had a hard time cobbling it together. You could see all the cuts where he was trying to make improvements, but it was so heartwarming to see Caleb and his gecko. that really warmed the cockles of my heart. Dan says, and so many niches in the hobby that you can be at the top of one, and if you switch to another part of the hobby, you are back to an intermediate or a novice level. Thank you, Candy, for letting us share that experience with you guys. And thank Jim for having done the film work, and thank you for having taken the shots when he first got a hold of his stuff in and was setting it up. And I was highly impressed with that background you guys did. You need to do that again at some point and make a long video about it, Candy. You could premiere it in a live stream and I'll be a mod for you. I modded last night for C. Andrew Nelson did his first live stream. Aquadacy did his first live stream, and it was hilarious watching him go through various issues. The look on his face when no one was asking questions and he didn't really have anything to talk about was priceless and worth the price of admission. But I really enjoyed helping him through his first live stream. And I would recommend that to anybody. There's no, I mean, you may not be a PewDiePie. You may not be, you know, making $1 million for every video you put out. Well, Candy, it was right between two other live streams, and Lucas had started, and your video, the video of Caleb and you, had just popped on Bob's channel. So I was basically modding and trying to catch little snippets of everything else. You know, it's kind of hard sometimes as a live streamer to understand when other people's stuff is going on. You know, that a lot of people will be leaving you and going to watch that, or never coming to you because they're watching something else, or they're involved in some other live stream or something like that. So Andrew Nelson ran for almost 2 hours on his first live stream, which impressed the heck out of me because it's hard to fill 2 hours worth of time with some kind of meaningful jibber jabber, you know. It gets tough. Yes, I'm talking about Aquadacy, Dan. He did his first live stream last night, and true to his form, I mean, the guy is a industrial light and magic veteran. He understands filmmaking and all the tools and tips and tricks of the trade. So true to that fashion, he had lots of little magic tricks that he had made to plug into his live stream, and I enjoyed the heck out of them. Jimmy showed up. Jim, I call Jim because I feel like Jimmy is a derivative thing to call him, you know, so I call him Jim. I don't know whether he likes that or not likes it. Hey Haley, welcome to the stream. How are the rope fish doing, Haley? We started out today with a poem, Elizabeth Bishop, The Fish, and I tried to plug poetry back into fish keeping by trying. Corona Ken wants to know if cyclops are smaller than Daphnia or about the same size. Ken, I think if you look, Daphnia come in about 3 different sizes. Some of them are really small. Some of them are really large. So I would tend to think that cyclops are larger than some Daphnia and smaller than other Daphnia. The normal ones that you get when you buy frozen Daphnia, yeah, a little bit smaller. Not a whole lot, but a little bit. I think Bob and Candy both have you on that. Anyway, I started out with poetry today because, one, I love poetry and I'm always trying to find ways to plug it into places where it doesn't belong. I use poetry on my Pacers basketball forums because no one ever uses it in places like that. You know, basketball and poetry are not a normal mix. But I try to mix it into fish keeping because I think there are some great similarities in what it takes to raise your fish keeping level to the next level, to advance your skills and your knowledge, is the same thing that it takes to do the same thing with poetry. You have to study. You have to be well read. You have to understand the nuances. You have to understand what other people have done. You have to understand who the pioneers are and what they did that changed the face of the game. And it's the same thing in poetry as it is in fish keeping. You need to be able to take the nuts and bolts of poetry and put them together in a functional way using the tools of the trade. And it's the same thing in fish keeping. You need to understand what the nuts and bolts of fish keeping are. You need to understand what the tools of the trade are. And you need to be able to functionally use those tools to put those nuts and bolts together in such a way that you come out with a thriving community, a functional biotope, a plant wonderland, a shrimp wonderland. If you have a functional knowledge and have done wide reading and have done wide research, when you come at setting up a new tank, you will instinctively do certain things because you already understand what that's going to lead to, how that's going to work out. Don't put a piece of wood that has lots of sharp sticks sticking up out of it in a tank with larger fish that are going to be thrashing around in the tank and are going to scratch themselves up on that sharp wood that's sticking up. Those are the kinds of things that will come naturally to you when you're setting something up, when you're Corona Ken says thanks, feeding newly hatched cories. And Oddball Haley says, I feed my newly hatched cories the fry food from Aquarium Co-op. Seems to work pretty well. That's the beauty of having someone like Corey in the hobby. In the hobby in the sense of he is a hobbyist. He understands what it is that needs to happen. And yet he's the person that's making and selling stuff. So I really enjoyed one of his live streams the other day where he was talking about different kinds of foods, and what it was that he wanted in foods, that he understood that it was better to have smaller foods so that all the fish could put them in their mouths than it was to have some smaller foods and some bigger foods that some fish wouldn't really be able to eat because they'd have to wrestle it. Haley asked about the raccoon situation.
Oh no.
Well, Haley had raccoons in her attic too. Yeah, a mother raccoon with babies. Haley, I got a piece of hardware cloth yesterday. I went to the store and got hardware cloth. And those that don't know, hardware cloth is basically like crosshatch of stainless steel, heavier stainless steel wire. Um, and it's, you basically can roll it out. I got a piece that was 3 foot by 5 foot, and the situation in our attic and the situation in our, basically our pantry is a stairwell that goes to our attic, and so we use the steps to put food on, and there are shelves in there that we keep food on. And at the top, it's basically a flat door laying flat down, and you lift it open, you push it up, and it'll open up and stand on one side so that you can get up and down in the attic. Well, that door, where it meets the top of the attic floor and it closes, that door is a little bit short. It doesn't close down on touching the floor of the attic. So someone has put insulation right there on that edge to seal the air gap so cold air doesn't get down. And the raccoon was basically going through that insulation and coming down into the stairwell and terrorizing our pantry. So what I did was I went and bought a piece of hardware cloth, 3 foot by 5 foot, and I laid it across where that gap is on that door, and it laid on the floor in the attic, and underneath the door closed down on it. Well, I heard noise, and I went in there and got my flashlight, and there was a young raccoon, and he just went through the insulation, got onto the hardware cloth and pushed it down so he could just climb down in it. And I scared him, and he wasn't that scared, but he was really young. I could tell he was, like a juvenile raccoon. I thought it was his mother, the big heavy raccoon, that was doing it, but it was a juvenile. She's obviously had kits in that attic next door, and so now we have a bunch of juveniles running loose. So my first attempt did not work to slow that raccoon down. So what I did was I got some pieces of heavy plastic and some screws, and I went up there and I took the edge of the hardware cloth that was falling down when he was coming down through, and I pushed it back up to the door itself, and I screwed it up to the door. So if the raccoon comes in, pushes down, then he's in like a bag trap. So now what he's going to have to do is figure out that he needs to go under the hardware cloth from the attic to get down in there. And I don't know, it doesn't appear to me that he did that last night, because I couldn't see any sign that he had been back in the pantry. So maybe I've solved it, maybe I haven't solved it. It's battling raccoons is sometimes a battle of wits. They're not dumb animals at all. They're extremely smart. They understand what's going on. They're not really afraid. Yes, the saga continues. I guess if he keeps coming in, or if I catch him in my hardware cloth bag that I created, I'll try to get some shots of him. He's a lot younger than I thought. I thought this was the mother raccoon, and she is big. I mean, like big and fat big. But this is obviously a youngster. Yes, Haley, if you did not see Caleb's video, I highly recommend that you catch the video of Caleb and his gecko. I love that gecko. It's a great quote. And Jim did a great job catching that. I love that he caught the gecko licking his nose. Yep, I would have to agree with that statement. And Ken, you're exactly right. That raccoon is hungry, and he knows where food is, and he's going to find some way to get at it, or find some that if this doesn't work, if I catch him in our pantry again, then my next plan of attack is to soak some marshmallows in apple juice and see if the stickiness of eating those will chase him off. They hate sticky. They hate things that are on their hands. They're always washing their paws. They're always trying to maintain cleanliness with their paws. So you give them something sticky to eat that sticks on their paws, they don't like that one little bit. Oftentimes they will read. Yeah, I agree, Haley. That was as heartwarming a video as I've seen in a long time. All right, guys, we're rounding up at the top of the hour. I hope my little ploy of using poetry as an example of the work involved with fish keeping has made some sense. I love the poet Elizabeth Bishop. I think she has the most incredible way of looking at the world around her. She had the most incredible ability to perceive things that were much deeper than the surface. And I think that skill, the skill required to be a deeply effective and deeply emotional, touching poet, someone that can reach inside the world around us and then use what they find there to touch us as readers emotionally. I think that skill transfers exactly to fish keeping, to being so sensitive to the world of our fish, that being so observant about the world of our fish and our fish in it is a phenomenal tool that we can use to understand our fish better, to recognize the behaviors and the normal activities of our fish to the point where we become accustomed to what their normal activities and behaviors are, so that we can then recognize when something's not right, recognize when something is different, not maybe bad, but different, like all of a sudden a fish that we've never seen do it before suddenly begins to exhibit breeding behavior. We bought this fish when it was just a fry, and we bought a whole group of them, and we've watched these fish for 2 years, and watch them grow up. Bob says her description of the fish make it clear that she saw it as a non-entity in respect to her having caught it. As she looked at it and described the fish, her view might have changed a little. And Adon Gallagher, Haley says there once was a man named Dwain who some people thought was insane. But he's full of knowledge you won't get in college, and his raccoons, they soon will be tame. I don't know about tame. I'm not really interested in taming a raccoon. We've got plenty of pets to take care of. What I want is for them to be free to live their life. I despise the fact that in urban America there is so little wildlife, that in our cities and in our towns wildlife is driven to extinction, forced out to the margins. And the idea that there are raccoons and opossums and groundhogs living in my neighborhood thrills me. And I want to see that continue. And if they need to live in my attic for them to survive, then I don't mind that. But where I draw the line is seeing them destroy bag after bag of noodles and trash everything in the pantry and knock all the jars and bottles over, that's not going to fly. So as long as I can keep them from coming down into the house and attacking our house, then I'm okay with raccoons in the attic, if that's what they need to be able to survive in this neighborhood. I'm happy giving them a home. I just don't want to have to feed them all the time either. We feed feral cats out front, and the raccoons usually come and clean up whatever's left over after the kittens and the cats get done eating. Caleb did great. He's a better YouTuber than me. Caleb was wonderful, Candy. It was very, very heartwarming to see that video. Ken, my dogs bark at them when they see them through the windows, like when the mother comes out of the attic next door. She's chewed a hole in the soffit of the house next door, and it's vacant, so there's nobody there to try to run them off. So when that mother comes out at night about dark time, my dogs will bark like crazy. If my dog sees them outside, when he's outside, he barks like crazy. But as far as them being in the house, and as far as Rufus recognizing that raccoon is in his pantry, Rufus does not do stairs very much. We've got stairs going down to the sidewalk out front, but it's only like 3 stairs. You put him on a stairway, he's not going to do stairs.
Got a bad hip.
Yeah, so the fact that there's a stairway going into the attic is not something that enters Rufus's mind very much. So he doesn't really recognize that noise is coming from the pantry, i.e. that raccoon that he sees on the roofs and in the attic is now in the house. He's not made that connection yet. So he doesn't warn us that the raccoon is in the pantry. All the banging and crashing of jars and bottles and cans warns us of that. All right, guys, I'm going to wrap it up. I hope there's been some usefulness. I appreciate you guys investing some of your personal time into listening to me ramble and go on and try to make weird conjunctions. Coronakin says, yeah, we had squirrels in the attic. Thought they were wearing roller skates for all the noise. Yeah, they really can. Jaden wants to know how babies get out of the belly. I don't want to have this talk. Tell her it's the stork. The stork does it all, Haley. Keep those children in the dark until the last minute. All right, Bob, thanks. You guys have a good rest of the weekend and good luck with your fish keeping.